Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. At least 9 Palestinians were killed overnight as Israel's military carried out its largest raid in the occupied West Bank in 2 decades. Israeli soldiers, backed by armored vehicles, bulldozers, fighter jets, and drones, launched simultaneous raids on Jenin, Tulkarem, and Tubas. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society reports Jenin's 3 main hospitals were besieged with Israeli soldiers, barring ambulances from transporting the wounded. Other witnesses described Israeli bulldozers destroying roads, water, and power infrastructure. As the raid got underway, Israel's Foreign Minister, Israel Katz, called for the mass displacement of Palestinians in the West Bank. Katz wrote on social media, quote, "We need to deal with the threat exactly as we deal with terror infrastructure in Gaza, including the temporary evacuation of Palestinian civilians and any other step needed. This is a war for everything, and we must win it," Israel's foreign minister wrote. Palestinian health officials say Israeli raids on the West Bank since October have killed over 650 Palestinians, 148 of them children. After headlines, we'll go to the occupied West Bank, to Ramallah, for the latest. Israeli attacks on the central and southern Gaza Strip have killed dozens of Palestinians over the past day. Among the dead are 6 people who were killed when an Israeli airstrike tore through residential buildings in the city of Khan Yunis.
A house was bombed, filled with residents. It had about 100 people in it, displaced people who came from Rafah and the cities around Khan Yunis. They were all bombed by F-16s. They were all children and women, all children who have no relation to the resistance or anything else. The Israeli military is committing a genocide.
In another attack, Israeli forces struck a school sheltering displaced people in Deir al-Balah, killing 8 Palestinians. And earlier today, forces killed Palestinian photojournalist Mohammed Abderrabo and his sister in an airstrike on their home in the Nuseirat refugee camp. The Palestinian Journalist Syndicate says Israel's killed at least 161 media workers since October 7th. On Tuesday, the United Nations warned Israel's continued assault on Gaza has severely hampered aid efforts and is disrupting plans to launch a mass vaccination campaign against polio next week. Israeli forces in Gaza have rescued a Bedouin Arab Muslim man who'd been kidnapped on October 7th. On Tuesday, Israeli soldiers said they found Qaid Farhan al-Qadi alone underground in a tunnel. He's the 8th hostage to be rescued. In Ukraine, at least 6 people were killed Tuesday as Russia's military continued a barrage of drone and missile attacks on critical infrastructure. Ukrainian officials have called the recent strikes the largest aerial assault since Russia's invasion in 2022. Among the dead are 4 people who were buried under the rubble of a hotel flattened by a Russian missile in the city of Kryvyi Rih. On Tuesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he hoped to present President Biden with a plan for victory next month when he visits the United States for the UN General Assembly. Zelensky said he'd also share the proposal with Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. But Zelensky ruled out any immediate ceasefire with Russia.
There can be no compromises with Putin. Dialogue today is in principle empty and meaningless because he does not want to end the war diplomatically. He does not want it. He pretends to be ready for a diplomatic way, but under the condition of giving him 30% of our land.
The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency is warning of the heightened risk of a nuclear catastrophe after Ukrainian soldiers press their counteroffensive deeper into Russia and close to the Kursk nuclear power plant. On Monday, IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi said after a tour of the aging nuclear facility that Ukraine and Russia must cease fighting around all nuclear sites, including Kursk and the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia power plant in Ukraine. Grossi warned the Soviet-era Kursk nuclear plant's reactors are not protected by the sort of containment domes typically found in modern nuclear facilities, making them especially vulnerable to damage from missiles or artillery fire.
A comparison like this, equating Chernobyl with Kursk, I think, is an exaggeration. But this is the same type of reactor, and there is no specific protection. And this is very, very important.
In Afghanistan, the Taliban's approved a wide-ranging morality law that forces women to completely cover their bodies and remain silent in public. The law will be enforced by the so-called morality police, who work under the Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice. The law codifies many rules that have been in place since the Taliban returned to power 3 years ago. The law has been widely condemned. This is Ravina Shamdasani, spokesperson for the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
These are partners who are being completely silenced, and they're attempting to render them into shadows. Their voices are no longer permissible. Education is no longer permissible. You cannot even see their faces. This needs to stop, and we need to continue talking about it. We need to continue advocating for it and putting pressure on the authorities to listen.
Afghan women have been defying the Taliban's edicts in videos posted on social media or shared with human rights groups. This is a woman living inside Afghanistan who concealed her identity as she recorded herself singing, "You have silenced my voice until further notice. You have imprisoned me in my home for the crime of being a woman."
زدی تا امر ثانی مهر خاموشی دهانم را مهیا میکنی تا امر ثانی آب و نانم را مرا با جرم زن بودن اسیر خانه‌ام کردی.
In India, protests are continuing over the rape and murder of a young medical student in a Kolkata hospital earlier this month. On Tuesday, police fired water cannons and tear gas as thousands marched in Kolkata to demand the resignation of West Bengal's chief minister. In news from Washington, D.C., Special Counsel Jack Smith has filed a revised indictment against Donald Trump for his efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Trump faces the same criminal charges in the case, but Smith reworked parts of the original indictment after the Supreme Court granted Trump broad immunity for official acts he took as president. The case is not expected to go to trial before the November election. In campaign news, Donald Trump's added 2 former Democrats to his transition team, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and former Hawaii Congressmember Tulsi Gabbard. Kennedy suspended his independent presidential campaign this weekend, but his name will likely remain on the ballot in some states. Kennedy's reportedly aiming to become Secretary of Health and Human Services if Trump is elected. Kennedy, who was once a prominent environmental lawyer, is a leading figure in the anti-vaccine movement. He has endorsed Trump despite once calling him a, quote, terrible president. And in Mexico, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has paused relations with the U.S. and Canadian embassies after the 2 countries criticized Mexico's efforts to reform its judiciary system. Part of the reform calls for judges to be elected by popular vote. Mexico's president-elect, Claudia Sheinbaum, who will take office October 1st, defended the proposed changes.
¿Qué es mejor?
What's best, justices of the Supreme Court elected by the Senate of the Republic or by the people of Mexico? Who says the people of Mexico? Raise your hand. This is democracy. Democracy to elect the president, democracy for lawmakers, and democracy for the judiciary too, so that it is a judiciary at the service of the people.
Last week, U.S. Ambassador Ken Salazar criticized Mexico's judicial reform proposal, saying, quote, popular direct election of judges is a major risk to the functioning of Mexico's democracy. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.